They've gone out of control and something has to be done. We're never going to find out exactly how much deer are there. And I think with what we have at our disposal is culling with a gun. And I think that it's females we should be after, and because they're the ones that have the calves. So if you have 24, 25 deer in your paddocks every night, and you see trees that you plant that they're destroying, and you will find some of the deer are not in very good condition because their food source is starting to dwindle. So does that man want to see them starve to death?
John is still with us. John on line 1. John, you're there as well?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which John are you? I'm John from Wicklow.
Yeah, you're yes. John on call 2 or line 2. We'll call you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So, John, do you want to respond then?
Yeah, I would say that this is a kind of a typical, pro-blood sport argument that we're taking out the weak, the sick and the injured. But nature will sort itself out. We're only interfering with this. And, I think anybody who would have deer anywhere near them should be honoured that deer are around them. They should actually be honoured because the deer are part of our natural heritage. And it's amazing to see deer in the wild. And we have to get away from this mentality in Ireland that we're competing with wildlife, that our interest always comes first. We have to look at it from the wildlife's perspective as well. And I think that we could do so much with deer in Ireland without killing them. We could do so much more. We could develop a tourist watching industry, a deer watching industry for the rural communities. Then there'd be no need to kill deer. But the point I always come back to is that when it comes to deer, we should be very careful of vested interests because there's a lot of people in this country who enjoy putting bullets into deer.
Are you part of part of an anti-hunting organisation? Is that right, John?
Yeah, I would be with the Association of Hunt Saboteurs.
Yeah, okay. But Bertie, do you... I just want to bring Bertie back in there too, John. Bertie, do you feel honoured to have so many deers?
No, I do not feel honoured to have so many deers. Not especially when they're affecting your farm and your livelihood and your cattle and your herd of cows. That's when you don't want deer approaching into your land and spreading disease onto it. Now, it's easy to say that there should be running wild all over the place. That just can't be done, and they can't be controlled because they're so wild that they don't stay away. They just break down everything. And the population is gone out of control. In all this area, throughout Galway, you have a huge problem in East Galway because of the mountains and the woodlands. They're coming down and spreading out more and more onto the farmland. And you have back into Oughterard as well, Quebec and Kildare, all those places have a problem. So to say there's not a problem, there is a problem, especially if you're living anywhere within 10 kilometres of a forestry. You'll have a huge problem on your farm.
Yeah, see, even from the text coming in now from people actually talking about, certain areas or specific areas. I see a lot of mention of County Wicklow as well. This listener, Wendy, has got in touch and says, I completely agree with the idea of culling deer. My family alone, both myself and my 2 sons, have been involved in car accidents with deer. One was with my friend. She was driving quite slow, 7 months pregnant. The deer caused a lot of damage to our car and the car coming in the opposite direction. The deer was killed outright. Both myself and my friend were okay, pretty shook up with shoulder injuries because of the safety belt. One of my sons also had a bad collision in the past couple of months on a stretch of road that you wouldn't normally see deer. Cost about €5,500 damage to the car. He was okay. Again, safety belt saved the major impact for him, but was quite sore for ages afterwards. The other son also hit a front bumper, not so much damage, but just over our road. We live in Wicklow. They're getting completely out of control. I love animals, but deers have no predators, so the numbers are out of control, suggests Wendy. What about that point, John? You're still with us from the Hunt Saboteurs. A lot of people getting in touch talking about the damage basically been caused even to their cars on the road.
Oh, absolutely, and that's again because we are competing with animals for road space. And like when you look at deer crossing roads, could be preventative measures taking place. Maybe put up deer-proof fencing, maybe put in speed reduction measures in that area. But at the same time, just because an accident happened doesn't mean that we should blanket the entire deer species, that they should be culled.
No, but that's one family talking about 3 in the one house.
Yeah, I know, but that's the reality of we have to coexist with deer, and I'm sure enough that if we're smart enough to put a man on the moon, we certainly can work out measures to coexist with deer. I'm sure we can do that.
Text in here from wild deer are 100% organic and live free, says this listener. Their numbers should be managed by humane killing and their meat should be sold as an alternative to beef. Cattle farming causes all kinds of environmental problems, says this texter, not least the uses of nitrogen fertilisers and also methane causing global warming. This listener says there's so many deer up where we live, you would need the army to gun them down. Let them frolic and enjoy themselves, says this listener. Patrick has got in touch to say, in the absence of a natural predator such as the wolf, deers must be culled. And in the absence of the wolf, human beings have to be the deer predator in order to maintain the population. Since the grey wolf was reintroduced at the Yellowstone National Park in the US to cull deer, there's been massive improvements in habitat growth that was previously been utterly destroyed by overpopulation of deer, says Patrick. 087 1400 106 is the number. We are going to stay with this. There's quite a few of you getting in touch with us about this today, actually. How bad is the deer issue in your area? Or perhaps like John and Bernie that were with us, do you think deer culling is not the answer? That's the number if you want to join us on the programme today. We're talking about this public consultation. It's the first time it's ever taken place on the future management of the deer population in this country. And what they found was that there's basically widespread support for culling at about 86%, according to the respondents that took part in the survey. So we're asking, is culling the solution or are there other options? Ger is with us on the line in Kilkenny. Ger, what do you think?
Hi, Andrew. Sure, culling is the only option. There is no other option. Talking about contraception and stuff like that is just total nonsense. It's to implant contraception in one animal would be a major task, and your figures show there that there's 55,000 deer culled every year. How in hell's name would you use contraception on that amount of animals? Culling is the only option, and at the moment. I know there is no figure on the amount of deer that there are nationally, but
there's no census, I don't think, really, if you want to call it that, ever.
No, but again, there's no big need to get the name and address of every single deer in the country. Once you know what the population generally is in an area, and the cull was always quite successful until COVID hit, and when COVID hit, then people were restricted. They weren't able to travel as far as to do the culling, and they weren't able to leave home, travel outside the 5 kilometres. And with the restaurants and hotels closed as well, the market for venison disappeared as well. So that's what led to the problem that's there at the moment, and we accept that there is a problem. And the only way of handling that problem is culling.
How big of an issue is it in Kilkenny, Ger?
In Kilkenny, not so much an issue. Parts of Tipperary, parts of Galway, a little bit in Kerry. Wicklow is where the main problem is at the moment.
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of texts actually from Wicklow. Today.
Wicklow is the main problem. Now, another part of the problem is the Department of Agriculture are pushing this thing about 16% of deer in Wicklow with TV. That figure is not true.
Why do you say that?
That's based on, if you look at their figures, they culled a certain amount of deer, and the ones that were suspected of having TB were sent to a lab for analysis. These are ones that had that were suspicious, that had lesions or had some other issue, and 16% of those ones were the ones that had TB, not 16% of the population. So that's a scare tactic that they're using to try get people to accept a cull. I mean, the people that are on the ground that know what's going on accept the validity for a cull. You don't need to use that type of tactic.
Denis is joining us too, Ger. Stay with us if you don't mind. I just want to get a couple of different voices in on this. Denis, do you think are there other solutions?
Yeah, there are plenty of solutions that aren't being currently tried in Ireland. What we have here is a case of extreme lazy management, and going to the gun is not the solution. It never was. There is no reason or no point in killing any animal. My name is Denis Nealis, and I work with Sentient Rights Ireland. We are a new political party set up to advocate for animal rights, human rights and climate justice. For example, when people talk about crashes with a deer, it's quite simple. Where we have good fences, we have good neighbours. Also, there should be nature bridges from one area, one side of the road to the other, especially where there's motorways, to facilitate the movement, not just of deer, but of all other wild animals. For example, badgers, foxes. And they should be allowed to roam free, as always. The big problem here is animal agriculture. Animal agriculture is the biggest cause of wild habitat loss. And where you have this happening, it is obvious there has to be a move to a plant-based society for many reasons, but not just for the culling.
Okay, so you're saying, Denis, sorry, your solution then, instead of culling the deer herd or the deer population as part of the management plan, your suggestion is nature bridges, is that what you said?
Nature bridges over roads. This has been done and is beginning to be done in other countries, especially where you have more and more
how would
roads.
That work, Denis?
You just build a bridge and grass it and soil it, and the animals.
And the deer will know where to cross the road then?
They will find their way across. The animals are very astute as to know how to get a place, and once they've done it once, they'll be able to do it again. Also, as aforementioned by Bernie Wright from afar, it is important to have an ongoing management strategy of contraceptives. This is quite easy to do. It's not difficult. It's just not been attempted here. The Park and Wildlife Service don't provide a service. What is happening with culling and with the hunting is freezer filling exercise. The carcass or dead body of a murdered deer is worth €1,700. So that's what's happening here. This is a commercial venture, really.
Okay, so Ger, to look at Denis's solutions. Denis says it's as simple as the issue around contraception is something that actually can work, and nature bridges. That's all we need.
Andrea, I never heard such nonsense in all my life. Nature bridges. At the moment, there's 55,000 deer culled annually, and that number isn't enough. How would you get contraception into that amount of deer? It's absolutely ludicrous what he's talking about. It's total nonsense. And then talk about the price of venison. Price of venison has collapsed completely. And what we do with the venison, it's the female population that's out of control. And it's a temporary out of control. It's COVID is really the problem there.
Right. So some of the text on this listener has got in contact to say the deer were on the island of Ireland before we were. Leave them alone. They're doing no harm. Another listener, I live in Laois. I start work early, 5 a.m. I see the deer on the road nearly every morning, and very often I see dead deer on the side of the road after being hit by traffic. On a rural road with ditches, they walk out onto the road. There's no chance of seeing them in advance. I hit one last year. It cost nearly £3,000 worth of damage to the car. Roger's with us as well. Roger, why did you get in touch with this?
Hi, hello there. Yeah, I approach these issues as a rights-based vegan position, which basically means that we encounter other animals as rights bearers. It means that when we kill them or use them, we would regard that as a rights violation. So I agree very much with what Denis said and John earlier. We have to come to a new and a probably more humble relations with free-living beings, rather than just reaching for the gun. And in relation to we couldn't vaccinate them, well, if we can get thousands of bullets into deer, why can't we get thousands of darts, if that's the solution? Now, I think that deers do cause a problem in the sense that the population will rise, but we really need to have a bit of humility and also think, well, let's look at every single non-lethal idea before we reach for the gun, because that is unacceptable.
You think it's happening
and
too
then
quick.
Most people complaining to you are livestock growers, and so there's a solution there. If we looked at things like vertical farming, that would bring us a solution straight away, in the sense that the deers wouldn't be able to access our food and they wouldn't be competing with so-called livestock.
Well, I'd say most of the texts I've read out, Richard, to be fair, sound like they're from just general punters, motorists who've encountered deers on their way to work on a daily basis. Let me bring in Richard too. Richard, what's your thoughts on this? Do we need a greater cull?
Absolutely. Culling of deer is vital for nature conservation, and the reason is that most of the deer in this country are introduced. You could call them invasive species, which shouldn't be here in the first place. They were brought in, for example, in Wicklow. The Sika deer were all brought in the 19th century by the Powerscourt estate and released into the hills. And they are causing untold damage to biodiversity and to protected areas like the Wicklow National Park, which is heavily overgrazed by deer. To the extent that the peat is being eroded and washing down into the streams. And I'm a landowner in County Wicklow. I own a small farm, and on it I've planted 6 acres of young broadleaf trees as my contribution to nature. However, anything which is less than 6 feet or 2 meters high is heavily browsed by deer, and it's very unlikely it will survive. So we've had to put in expensive deer fencing to prevent the deer getting at it.
And has that worked? The fencing?
It has protected the plantation, but that cost 21,000 to fence 6 acres. And I mean, it's completely unsustainable in the long term because fencing doesn't last forever. And in rougher ground, fencing can easily be breached by deer. They can push under it and so on. So as a qualified ecologist, I'm completely in favour of culling of deer under a managed programme, obviously. And this has been proposed for decades, but there's been no action from the government.
No, well, I think that's what this is about, isn't it?
Strategy after committee, but no action on the ground. They've left it to the hunters, which is completely inadequate. Well, I'm in favour of the hunting, but, unless it's done in a planned way and a monitored way, it's not going to achieve anything. Well, we're going to be left with massive damage to our heritage and biodiversity.
I think that's a big part of this consultation because it was conducted as part of that, the development of this national deer management strategy that they're talking about. But I take your point, Richard. It's obviously taken quite some time. Interesting text though in from a listener who says, I'm from Connecticut originally, where Lyme disease originated. Deer in our rural area were dangerous pests. Several friends have been severely debilitated by Lyme. I hit and killed a deer with my car. It leapt directly in front of me and I was lucky not to have been killed or injured myself. Cull deer before they become such a hazard here, says this texter. Keep your thoughts coming into us. lunchtimelive@newstalk.com. As always, that's the email address if you do want to get in touch. I'll have to leave it there though. For the moment, Roger, Richard, Denis and Ger, thanks a million for getting in touch with us. Now, I do want to give you another opportunity though to enter. We have a fantastic prize to give away today.